jump over there. We're going to pick up on this journey. So far, we've seen where they come through the Red Sea. On the other side of the Red Sea, they had a song of worship that they glorified God. And then right after that, they have a pretty good journey from the shore over to Marah, which means bitter water. And after that long journey is when we see that more conflict, this cycle we're going to see. Before we get further, let's go and have a word of prayer. Our most wonderful and loving Father, thank you so much for all that you do for us. We thank you for this time that we have to study your word. We pray that you would help us to be able to understand it in a simple way so that we could make it a part of who we are and how we think and how we understand your wisdom as you're revealing it to us through your word. We thank you for everyone who is here tonight. We pray that you would bless us and bless those who are joining us tonight online. We thank you, Father, for this local congregation, and we pray that we would always be here to help people to see your love, truth, and be able to bring them to you, Father. We ask this in Christ's name, amen. So this is a cycle, I kind of call it, as they come to the bitter waters after a 3-day journey. They arrive, and the first thing they find is this abundant water, but they find the water is undrinkable. So Moses takes a tree, puts it into the water turns sweet. So the first of many miracles and complaints back and forth that we see, and they're challenged with their faith, and I keep wanting to reinforce this idea that this is our personal journey. This is us. You know, as we come through the Red Sea, we come through baptism, and we start that journey, and how quickly that we run into obstacles and things, and we're challenged in our faith. And many times we, as the children of Israel, complain. And so after this, they travel, they move on down what I call Elim, and it's where we read this last week about the bread from heaven, manna. And this is where we see as well the idea that where God is starting to set up the Sabbath, the concept of the Sabbath, and that rest. And he tells them, he instructs them. So they're complaining because they're starving to death. They complained about water. Then next we see they complain about food. So God goes above and beyond. He says, I'm going to provide you food every morning. You have to get up early. You have to get out there. You pick it up. You just pick up enough, an omer per family, per person, I think, and not more than you need. And it quickly taught them because it showed that it would rot if it was left over by the morning, except for the 6th day. The 6th day, he said, you're going to collect double, and it will last you. And it does. And he said, because this is the Sabbath. We don't have, other than just, you're not going to work on that day. And so we see that taking these people who are slaves and bringing them across and starting to develop them into a nation state from just a group of nomadic people, slaves and such, but building a state, a nation out of them. From there, they travel up through the wilderness of Sin and Marah-thon. And Marah-thon is where we see another story that's where we're gonna pick up tonight again, about the water. Now, we talked about that last week. We looked at the idea of how vital water is and the amount of water it would take for 1 million plus people. And Gary, you were saying that, probably close to 2 million, 3 million maybe, we don't know. But even with livestock, if you just figure, 3 to 4 gallons a person per day, we're talking about cleaning, all the other things of preparing food and drinking yourself, and then all your livestock. That's why I always thought, when I was growing up, they'd say, well, he struck and you brought him water. I saw a little spigot or something, but it's a gusher. I mean, we're talking about a lot of flowing water that's coming out. So this is a miracle. This is, again, something supernatural, something that's beyond nature that could not occur normally. So let's pick up in 17:1. And all the congregation of the people were thirsted for water. And there the people grumbled against Moses. There we go. And they moved from the wilderness. I'm sorry, let me start over. I got too many screens I'm looking at and all this confusion with this new configuration. Okay, all the congregation of the people of Israel moved from the wilderness of Sin by the stages, according to the commandment of the Lord, and they camped at Raphida. And there was no water for the people to drink. Therefore the people quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." And Moses said to them, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord?" So this is also another word here, congregation. This is these little words that are starting to pull together from just being descendants, that we see God as identifying them as a congregation of people. And it says they moved by stages. So what I envision is looking at a group that would move forward, establish a camp, and then the next group would move forward and join them. And then another group of them would move forward and join them, and they would move in stages, not one massive convoy that would just keep moving. And that was interesting when you think about that. That's a logical way to move them. And this way the lead group can get up front, get everything set up, and then the next groups would come and join them. And still, that's a very long train of people coming in behind them. And the quarrel, now they're disputing with him. They come at him very aggressively, in other words. And they say, "Why are you quarreling with me?" And then he says, "You're testing God." What does he mean by that when he say we're testing God? When you say you're testing somebody.
You tell us to believe in you, but we're telling you we're having problems, and you're the one who took us here, and you were the one supposed to be taking care of us. So we're going to test you to see whether you're really going to do what you told us you would do. Yeah.
What are you doing? What are you doing? I also see it, I've heard it this, "You're testing my patience, young man." You ever heard that? That phrase? You're testing my patience.
Well, I was kind of thinking of it as, with the way that they were, if God doesn't do something quick, then it's going to test whether they're going to believe in him or not.
I think it is true. It's testing both directions, right? I mean, they're testing God's patience. In other words, I see is that they're testing God's patience, and they themselves, it's a test of their faith. So I think here, Moses is specifically kind of saying, you're pushing God. Why are you testing him? Why are you pushing him? You testing? And the only way I kind of saw that was, I do remember, I don't know if it was my grandma or who, someone said, "You're testing my patience." And when I saw this and read it again and went, "You're testing the Lord." So what would that mean? It would change it, wouldn't it? It would mean like, whoa, you better be careful. You're pushing.
Like he's on their timetable, not them on his timetable.
And again, the lack of faith. So already, from the time that they departed, they sang that song on the beach across the Red Sea. We've already seen them grumbling about water, about food, about water. All these are the physical things. And they're not seeing this. They forget about the supernatural power of God and what God is providing and able to accomplish in his power. And they're limiting him as if somehow this wilderness that they're in, is going to overcome God's abilities. And so now you've led us out here to die. And that's the same way. Sometimes, as a Christian, we think, somehow that the world is going to be able to overcome God's ability, or he's ignoring me. And we know, well, God didn't ignore us, but at the same time, we can be that person are we testing the Lord's patience? Are we pushing it to a point? But they're thirsty. I mean, it's a real problem, isn't it? In verse 3, Gary?
Like you're saying, testing his patience, like you're pushing the limits of his patience. What happens if you push it too far?
Oh, yeah, whenever I got that warning, I knew what was next. It was like, you better stop. Stop. Because when the test is over, it will not end well for you, right? It's not going to end well for you. So absolutely, when he says, they're testing. So, but they are thirsty. It's a real legitimate concern. It's a problem. And so I don't want to minimize and make it sound like we're just big crybabies because we have bills and we have health problems and we have these issues going on. That's not the point I'm trying to make, is that somehow just suck it up, get tough. Got to buck through this, trust God, and stuff, just forget. But understand that the Lord hasn't forgot us. And he's not going to let us go beyond what we can handle. We know that. It's just hard for us to sometimes see the answer and understand on what timeline he's going to provide it. And that's where we struggle and we stumble. I think we stumble a lot in trying to say, this is what I need versus how much of it is a need and a want. So, but this again, I think the food and the water, to me keeps almost like as a Christian, our physical desires and needs, our physical needs, let's throw desires out. The legitimate physical needs that we have in life are there, and they're never going to go away. Just like this journey that we're going to see, it never goes away. They're always going to be struggling, and they stumble every time, don't they? They're stumbling every time they're allowing that to happen. But the people thirst for water, picking up in verse 3, and the people grumbled against Moses and said, why did you bring us up out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst? So Moses cried to the Lord, what shall I do with these people? They are almost ready to stone me. That's a rebellion, isn't it? We saw earlier, we were saying that they're coming at him hard. They're arguing with him, and now they're on the verge of violence. When people are so adapted to just fulfilling their physical needs, and they have one method that's always provided for them, and you try to take them out of that comfort zone and say, no, this is the way it's now going to be provided for you, people don't like that. They just don't like that. And that's why they keep referencing Egypt. Yeah, we might have been slaves in Egypt, but you know what? We had 3 square meals and we had water. And now out here, no. But the Lord has been providing for them. I mean, he provided for them water once. They're thirsty. They're complaining. God gives them water again. So it's like the same type of desires of real problems that we're struggling with. So he cries to the Lord. He turns to God and he goes, look, they're trying to stone me. And then God says in verse 5, and the Lord said to Moses, pass on before the people, taking with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock at Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water shall come out of it, and the people will drink it. And so Moses did so in the sight of the elders. So what do we see? We see God he's having them, it's kind of the way this is set up, the way it's going to play out. God is setting the stage. He's setting it up to where they're clearly going to know that Moses is taking action. And so he's telling them, I want the people to see you. I want you to be in a view where they can see you as you're going to go past them. And then I want you to take that staff, because that staff is symbolic, isn't it? To the people, they would have probably kept it and worshipped as an idol, because it was symbolic of the power. And then he even says, the staff that what? You struck the Nile with. So he's associating it as well, saying, look, this is going to help to show them that this is what you're going to do. But he also is having them, take the elders of Israel. These are the patriarchs of what we would call the clans or the families. And that is going to help, because one of the ways that you have influence is through the head of the families. It's not Moses and a mob of people. It's each of those families are controlled and guided by these patriarchs. So if you go back and say, well, who is arguing with Moses and who is ready to stone Moses, it was probably these guys, because it's coming at them and they're going to him. So he's kind of saying, take them with you. And it's also going to be a very close-up. We don't want them to be off in the crowd where they don't see what happens. We want them to be able to witness exactly what's going to happen. And so he did, and he did it in the sight of everybody. And so the name is called Massah or Meribah, because of the quarreling of the people of Israel, and because they tested the Lord by saying, is he among us or not? Now that's different. Look at this. I thought it was about water. Right? Wasn't this problem about water? What does he say? He named this place because what? They tested the Lord, and because, by what? How did they test him? Is the Lord among us or not? What? You'd say, no, we wanted water. That was our problem. So what can we see about this is, to me, you can see this idea that when we are looking at things in which we believe God should be providing for us, and we won't call his name out and blame him because we're a little smarter than that. I mean, if everything bad that happened in your life and you turn and said, God's fault, I didn't get paid on time, God's fault. You know, the groceries, all the groceries are gone, God's fault. We wouldn't say that. But when we complain and we're struggling and we're griping and like, well, I can't get this and there's no food and there's this, bills are piling up and all this is going on, what are we doing? When we grumble, that's grumbling. You know what we're saying? Is the Lord among us or not? You see? So it's neat, because if you follow this thought, the people are just complaining because they want water. And God is reflecting through the name of this location is, no. You know what you're complaining about? You don't believe I'm with you. So when we complain and we have our anxiousness that overcomes us, in a way that the Lord is saying, do you think I'm not with you? Where?
I'll take my presence from you and I'll see how you survive then.
Yeah. I'm with you. Because the people would have said, oh, no. We weren't saying you weren't with us. We were just saying, we want water. We want water. We want food. And then he's saying, no, what you're really saying is he really with us? And that, to me, was very profound when we consider. We gripe about the physical things that we're lacking and the struggles in the world. But in a lot of ways, by being consumed with those things, we are like the children of Israel, and direct connection is we're really doubting the Lord, that he promised to take care of us. Again, sometimes it's because not the way we want to be taken care of, but he will provide for us. We have to have that faith. The next thing that's recorded here we see is this war against Israel by the Amalekites. And this is going to be something very historically important, and it's going to come up. So let's go ahead and let's read 8 and 10. Then Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. So the same location, in other words, where they're at water and they're camping, they come and attack them. So Moses said to Joshua, choose for us men and go out and fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand. So Joshua did as Moses told him and fought with Amalek, while Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. Whenever Moses held up his hand, Israel prevailed. And whenever he lowered his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands grew weary. So they took stone and they put under him. And he sat on it, while Aaron and Hur held up his hands on one side and the other side and the other on the other side. So his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. And Joshua overwhelmed Amalek and his people with the sword. So Amalek has been trailing them. This is something that we learn historically in the future at what is going on here and why we're going to see the prophecies that are going to come against them, because they're taking advantage. It's kind of like you have a convoy, if you had a wagon train and you had all the women and children in a weak area, in a vulnerable part of the caravan, the Amalekites are attacking them and they're taking them off and they're killing them. And so these attacks have been occurring all along, and it's built up to this point where they finally have open conflict. Now, if you remember, whenever they came out of Egypt and God said, no, I don't want you to go up by the Amorites. And he guides them away from them. But at the same time, if you recall, it said he readied them for war. They were ready for war. They had the weapons of warfare, but they weren't really hardened and trained with that warfare. And this is a development as well. This first battle is another part of the developing them as a nation. They got to be able to defend themselves. So this is a training. This is almost kind of a season, building up your soldiers, your leaders and stuff. So, and that's exactly what Moses is establishing, basically a chain of command. He's establishing organization of the military, and then they're going to go out and they're going to actually practice tactics. Think about it. I mean, how well do you think that a bunch of slaves would be organized and know how to fight?
Well, I always wondered how did they recognize that when his hands were down, they were losing, but when Moses' hands were up, that they were winning?
I don't think it really is saying that. I think what it's doing is giving you a big, picture. I don't think Joshua knew. I don't think down on the battlefield. I think that they were high up enough that what he's describing as Moses is writing the story is that every time his hands would go down, they could look and see that the Amalekites were prevailing. That as soon as his raised up, Joshua was prevailing. And I don't know that down on the battlefield, they could see that his arms were up or down. So that's what I thought was more of, he's just telling us that every time Moses' hands went down, poor Joshua started getting waxed. As soon as they got his hands back up, then they would start waxing against the Amalekites. But it's a pretty fierce battle. And the other thing with warfare is it's very, very upfront and personal. I mean, it's not like the way we fight today many times. It's, with guns that shoot way out there and you hit somebody and you don't even know sometimes. You just spray bullets and then people fall down and stuff. No, this was like eyeball to eyeball. You're like fighting and grabbing hand-to-hand combat. And it's a totally different situation when you think about this type of combat. And the fact that they would not necessarily know how to fight in a way compared to the Amalekites. The Amalekites are people that are civilized and organized in a nation state. They have trained professional soldiers and people that fight all the time. That's what they're doing. And now they're going to fight against these slaves. So it is a very important battle. And it's also, this is faith. Because this story is going to go back after the battle's over that evening. Those guys are going to be we used to call it an after action review. After every military action we'd have, we would gather all the leaders and we would review what happened, how it happened, what our plans were, how to actually evolve. And then we'd come up with, okay, this is what we need to train on. This is what we got to do. Guys, you got to learn how to do this and this and this. You can almost see where after this is over with, Joshua and these men, the leaders, came back and they're sitting around talking to Moses. And there's Aaron and Hur saying, dude, every time his hands went down, you were getting waxed. And every time we were holding his hands up, you were victorious. What would that tell you? What would you think about that? If you were the men down there fighting and you didn't see his hands going, but I don't think I'd be looking at the guy trying to slash my throat and kill me, right? I wouldn't, is his hands up? Whoa, what's the knife? You wouldn't be looking up there. Oh, his hands are up. Okay, we're going to start winning this fight now. So the only people that really mattered to were the two that were holding his hands up and Moses. They're the only ones that know that. But afterwards, when they're sitting around talking about it with the leaders and those commanders that were in the battle, and now they won the battle. So they could sit around and go, look at us.
Yeah,
Look.
but you know that there was people that were killed.
Oh, there's a lot of...
You take us out here and all you want to do is kill us.
There's a lot, there probably were a lot of people complaining, saying, and now you can't even defend us. What have you done? You've brought us out here, tried to starve us to death. We're going to die of dehydration, and then we've got these enemies attacking us. So there's definitely a lot of doubt and challenges. But the men who were out there on the battlefield, there's a lot of women and families mourning because of the battle, the losses. But the ones that did survive and beat back a professional army, they're kind of like going, oh, it was a tough day, but, guess who won? We did. And then guess what's going to happen? Aaron's going to go, you know what? Every time we let Moses' hands slack down, you started getting waxed. They started whooping you. And every time we raised his hands up, you guys started winning. So who really won the battle? Do you see the psychology of it? The story of them telling that the only reason you really won this is, again, because God is among you. Remember, we just talked about the water and how that the water, they complain about the water, and then God, when he names a place, he says he names a place because of the fact that they question and test God. Is he among us or not?
But God didn't tell Moses either. If you do this, then I will make you successful, and if not, then the Amalekites will be successful. He made them realize it.
Well, something told them to Moses to take the staff and put his hands out. It's a good point. We don't know. There's nothing that says in here, Moses, go on top of the mountain, take Aaron, take her, and stand there and put your hands out and keep them up while they're fighting. And then if your hands start to fall down, you need to get those guys to support your arms. And we don't have any necessary. But for some reason, he goes to the top of the mountain. He takes those two guys, and he puts his hands out while they're fighting. So it's inspired. Somehow he's aware that this must be something God wants him to do. Because we've already read times where he said, take the rod, walk before the people. So I think it was something God said. Go on top of the mountain and stand up there. Like I said, the guys in the battlefield, they don't have time to look up. They're too busy trying to save their lives. It's going to be after that, when the two men who were holding his arms up saw what was going on, when they couldn't hold his hands up, that Joshua and the children of Israel were starting to get whooped and beat and killed. And as soon as they could get his hands up and do what God had said to do, they started winning. You see the psychological game? The question was, is God among us? Now it's humbling, because as they sit around the campfire that night after that battle and they're catching their breath and they're thinking they were so victorious and look what we did. It's not what you did. It's not. If anything, you could say, whew, Aaron and her won because he kept Moses' hands up. They're the winners. No, the point was, it's about God. I used to be so struggled by, I'd read this story, and I'd say, what are you doing? He's standing on the mountain, his hands are up, and they go down, they get beat, up, they start winning, down, they get beat, and they go, I'm like, I would always go like, what's up with this story? Because I started realizing the guys on the battlefield, Moses isn't a cheerleader. He's not up there going, go boys!
And who is this her? Who is her?
I don't know.
I mean, why was it Aaron? I know why it's Aaron, but why her?
I don't know her. I'll have to look that up. You got me. I years ago I used to know, but I don't know. I can't remember who he is. I'll get back to you on that. But I imagine it's probably one of the close associates with him and Aaron. I'm not sure. I don't know if it's a brother. So if somebody wants to look it up and pop it in. But my point about this is that there is something happening that is the men on the battlefield are unaware that is occurring. But the men who are involved up on that mountain, they know exactly what's happening, because they can see the effect of when his hands go down. They can see the effect when his hands go up. They can see the battlefield, and they can see Moses' hands and the effect of not being able to hold them up. If they can't obey God and keep his hands up, guess what? They can't obey him, they start getting killed. If they can hold his hands up and do what God says, guess what? They start winning. And then that evening, and the lesson's going to go forth out throughout everybody, because it's going to go through the leaders, that everybody's going to talk about it and say, good job, Ron, you guys went out there and you really whooped those guys. Thank you. No. Do you know that Moses and Aaron and Hur were up on the mountain, and every time Moses' hands went down, we started getting killed? If Moses had not kept his hands up like God had told him, we would all be dead. So this is not just some random historical event that just talks about how the children of Israel got harassed. This is a developmental process, like I said, taking a bunch of slaves that are unorganized and bringing them out, making them a nation state. And part of a nation state is that they need to be able to defend themselves. They have to have structure, and that's what they're slowly getting as they go through this. And that's one of the things that now they're going to know, that every time those soldiers go into battle, they're going to have to rely on who?
God.
God.
Well, they were relying on Egypt before, And God is trying to tell them, don't rely on where you were before, because you need to be relying on me. And it's not relying just on Moses, because I am doing this through Moses.
Yes, yes. And I look how long there in the end of 12. So his hands were steady until the going down of sun. We're talking, I don't know when the battle started. Let's just say 10 o'clock, mid-morning. That's a good time to go. And all the way till sundown. 6 hours, 7 hours that Moses is standing there holding his arms up. Now this is interesting. Now this is where we're starting a shadowing, a pointing towards something big. Then the Lord said to Moses, write this as a memorial in a book and recite it in the ears of Joshua. This is not something for everybody. Listen, it's very specific. He's saying, write this down for the ears of Joshua. Recite this. Well, he just saw it. But this is a future. He's talking, you're going to write this down in a book, and later on, you're going to retell him what this was. And he said, now this is a prophecy. He says, tell Joshua that I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under the heaven. And Moses built an altar and called the name of it, the Lord is my banner, saying, a hand upon the throne of the Lord. The Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. You remember the talking donkey? Somebody was just talking about that. You remember Balak? When the children, at the end of the 40 years of wandering through the desert, and God is ready to bring them over, as they're moving through, the Edomites get whooped up. I mean, they're a fierce army by this time, just at the end of the 40 years. Then they come into Moab. And the Moab, Balak is freaking out because he sees all of these Israelites and he's heard of all the things that have happened. So what does he do? He goes and gets Balaam. And he takes Balaam and he tries to force Balaam into what? Trying to force Balaam into cursing the children of Israel. And so that was something that backfired on him. And in Numbers 24:20, we see this idea of this utter destruction, this prophecy in Numbers 24:20. It said, and he looked on Amalek, and he took up his discourse, and he said, Amalek was the first among the nations, but its end is utter destruction. There are 3 curses or blessings that Balaam ends up, and he can't curse the people, but he ends up blessing them. And then Balak's going, no, that's not what I wanted. You need to curse those people. And then he gives another blessing, and in that, but the last discourse, Balaam says this exact same thing. He says in Numbers 24:20, he said, and he looked on Amalek, and he took up his discourse. They're going to be the first nations with utter destruction. They're going to be completely wiped out. And in Deuteronomy 25, we have it again, Deuteronomy 25:17, that this remembrance said, remember what Amalek did to you on the way you came out of Egypt, how he attacked you on the way when you were faint and weary and cut off your tail, those who were lagging behind you and did not fear God. Therefore, when the Lord your God has given you rest from all of your enemies around you, and in the land the Lord your God has given you for an inheritance to possess, you shall blot out the memory of Amalek from under the heavens. You shall not forget. That's what Moses wrote in this book. See, here in Exodus, Moses is told, write this down. And he gives him a real short version and says, you tell Joshua, you're going to recite this when he goes to take over, which Moses doesn't know. Moses doesn't know he's not going into the promised land at this point. I mean, Joshua was a very, very young man at this point. He's very young, probably in his 20s, middle 20s. But God is already seeing that Joshua is going to be the one that's going to lead them. Now, Moses is probably thinking, well, just in battle, per se. But Moses is going to lead them as a future nation state. But that's what's fascinating is when he tells Joshua, he says, remember what they did to you when you came up out of Egypt. And then he says how he attacked you when you were faint and weary. Remember where they at? They were thirsty. That's when Moses struck the rock. They were attacking them. And that's when the battle occurred, was the second time of the striking of the rock for water. It's during this time that they've been harassing them all the way. And they were attacking, and here it even says, that they were attacking those who lagged behind, who couldn't stay up. They were picking them off. And the fact that they didn't fear God. They should have been fearful of God. I mean, I'm sure they got the news about what happened to Egypt. And they didn't fear him. So this is something. Now, did it happen? No. Joshua never wiped out the Amalekites. They came in. They never possessed all the land. Because what did he say? He said, when God has given you rest from all the enemies around you, they never got the rest from all the enemies around them. And it really wasn't going to happen until David, King David. But this never happened. Do you know when it did happen? Well, there was a king named Saul. Remember that one? And God said, go and kill the Amalekites and wipe them out. I want everything, all the children, I want everything wiped out. Livestock, he wanted them. Why? He told Moses to write in the book to tell Joshua that when he crossed over, and then he told Joshua, when you cross over and you're done, go kill the Amalekites. Now we're talking nearly 400 years from the time that they attacked them on the trip before Saul is told to go do it. Now, to me, there's a lot of times I look at what God has promised and I go, okay, when's it going to happen? I'm waiting. And how many people could have been critics and said, I was reading Exodus the other day, as you're an Israelite, he said he's going to wipe out those Amalekites. Oh, but did you not read the part where it said once you were at rest and you occupied the land, then you could go and kill the Amalekites? But you notice God didn't forget? 400 something years, because there's 350 years in the period of the judges. So from the time they come in, after Joshua dies, we go through this time period of the judges, then they establish a king, Saul, and so it's nearly 400 years. Then he is told, and that's why sometimes you look at that and you go, why was he so vicious to the Amalekites? He brought back the king Agag, remember? And Samuel walks up and goes, what are you doing? Do I hear the cows and do I hear what's going on? Well, we just brought them back so we could sacrifice to God. We took the best. And then Samuel slaughters Agag right there in front of him. It's like God had not forgot. So that's kind of that full circle. This is where it starts. Later on when you read, I want you to remember that. That's something interesting. Now, as you start to look at the aspect of building this nation, you got a lot of management structure you got to establish. How do you manage 1 million people? Moses is one thing that when he was in Egypt, the people were established in their little structure, their social constructs, their families on the blocks, the cities, wherever they lived as they were working in Egypt. So Moses, as far as a leader, he would talk to the elders, and then he'd go deal with Pharaoh, and then he'd strike a plague against them and all that. And then all of a sudden he says, let's go. And then he starts leading them out. But it's kind of a caravan. But it's getting to the point it's becoming, they're complaining, they're griping. And so how do you handle all of this? And Moses is trying to handle it all. And this is where we start to get a little more family and looking. We're not going to read all of it. We're going to look at kind of this encounter with Jethro. This is his father-in-law. And so now we find his father-in-law. So we'll pick up there in 18:1. And Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard all that God had done for Moses and for Israel, his children, how the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt Now Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, had taken Zipporah, Moses' wife, after he had sent her home, along with her 2 sons. The name of one was Gershom, for he had said, I have been a sojourner in the land. I'm going to pause there because we see some things that are important. First off, you see Jethro is described as a what? As a priest. We're never told specifically, but we do know that there were priests that we have already run into, one called Melchizedek. There was a priest of God Most High. Most Bible scholars will say that Jethro is probably a priest to God, and not in a way that we can necessarily understand, but probably one that was interceding for his family. We know the patriarchs, the head of the families, were also considered kind of priests as well. But here, Moses is pointing out as he writes Exodus that Jethro is not just a patriarch, but he's also something religiously significant, somebody important. We also see where what happened to Moses' family during all this turmoil as he's in Egypt. At some point, it seemed like he took his children and his wife and family with him. And then, and like I said, these plagues didn't happen in like 2 months. It wasn't like a 1 month thing and then they started traveling. This is probably close to a year or so. So at some point, it seems that his family, he sends them back, and they go back and stay with her father and with his sons. And Gershom, and it's interesting, these names, why he mentions these is because, in a sense, he was a sojourner. He didn't belong in Midian, the land there. He didn't belong there. He didn't belong in Egypt. You know, it's kind of this concept of God's children. And remember what the Hebrew writer said, that when Moses made that choice to give up the house of Pharaoh and the riches of Pharaoh's house so that he could pursue the things, he kind of looked at himself like Abraham and all the others as a sojourner. This is not my home. This is not where I live. And the other, Eliezer, for he said, the God of my father was my help and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. Now this is, who's the God of my father was my help? Well, it's the father he never really got to be around, because he was put into the river and then picked up by Pharaoh's daughter and raised in Pharaoh's house as probably like a step-grandson or something. But look how he goes back and he looks at the faith of his father. It's the faith of his father that carried on down somehow, and he gives God. And then it was that faith, in other words, my father of God, that's why I'm saying God of my father was my help. He's the one that helped bring me out from the sword. And that is a beautiful, I think, compliment towards his father. Moses' father-in-law came with his sons and wife, and Moses in the wilderness where he had camped at the mountain of God. This is Sinai. So they've now traveled and they are there at the base of Sinai. And he sent word to Moses, I, your father-in-law, Jethro, am coming to you with your wife, your 2 sons with her. Moses went to meet his father-in-law, and he bowed down and kissed him. And they asked each other their welfare, and they went into the tent. It's very personal. It's switched from this, grumbling about the water and all this. And now remember, Moses is the author. He wrote this. And so when you see this thing, when he says about his father-in-law being that priest, and then you see about his relationship with his father and how he acknowledged that it was the father's faith that was set forward, and that's what helped deliver him into where he's at. And then now we see this reunion, and I think it was very meaningful and emotional. Moses is exhausted. Just think, he has to be emotionally and physically exhausted. The man is 80 years old. He has lived a full life. And after all that he's had to put up with, to see family and to get to be reunited. So I can see why this was so important to him. And, they meet, they go into the tent. And this is where they start to exchange, how's it going, what's been happening. And Moses told his father-in-law all that the God had done to Pharaoh. And so now what he's doing is he's making it personal. He's telling a first count of story. Man, I went in, and he's telling him a very detailed personal account, a witness of what he saw. And to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, and all the hardship that had come upon them in the way, all the complaining, the water. He's venting. Moses is venting to his father-in-law. Whew, and that's why when I read this again today, I started really thinking about how amazing this was. This was almost therapeutic moment. This is why he writes this, because you can see emotionally all the buildup and struggle of the combat with the Pharaoh, bringing them up to the edge of the Red Sea, the people complaining at him, and then he's looking around at the water, and God says, strike it, and he strikes it, and they go through it, and then he says, yeah, I mean, all the pressure, and he gets over him, they grumble at him, and they come at him, and I mean, on, and they're complaining and coming at him, and a million people, and he's got to think about their welfare. And then his father-in-law comes, and his wife and his kids, he goes in the tent, he goes, man, it's been hard. This has been rough.
I mean, he didn't apply for the job.
Yeah, it was that Bush that called me, that Bush. Yeah, he didn't apply for that job either. So I think this is an important little beautiful moment that he's expressing from himself and how he felt after all that he's been enduring. We forget about that side of him. And since we know that he wrote this. Now, Jethro, he praises God. He says, blessed be the Lord who has delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians and out of the hand of Pharaoh and has delivered the people under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know the Lord is greater than all the gods, because in this affair they dealt arrogantly with the people. Now, you think, wow, that's just one of these great praise team little comments. But let's slow down and look. He's a man of faith, Jethro. He's heard secondhand, probably, as messengers have come, that they're free. But when he listens to then what Moses and everything that happens, it's confirming his faith. It's like it dawns on him all that God has done for them. And now, decisive. This is what should have happened to the Amalekites. This is what should happen to the people, is verse 11. They should now know that the Lord is greater than all the gods. That's what God's been trying to do. God's been trying to get that point across to everyone.
I know, but just like testimonies, and the Christians should be able to tell other people what we have gone through and then how God delivered us.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same here. And it's not just one day. It could take years and years, but God let you prevail.
Mm-hmm. And this testimony should create that response, hopefully, from people, that they would look at it and go, wow, that's proof that there is a God. And I have seen I've seen it in my grandparents, I've seen it in others, the things that they experienced in life, the suffering, and yet the joy they had, and what they were able to overcome, that they were always provided for through the depression, through the hardships, World War II, all that stuff. And they were very loving towards God because they could look back and see through the hardships, but see all the blessings and not be bitter. And that's because as these things are happening, like what Jethro is pointing out, now I know that the Lord is greater than all the gods, because they're all handmade. And God defeated all the gods of Egypt. Remember that. So he's kind of just bringing that back up. But also, how did the Egyptians deal with them? With arrogance. We can kill them. We're going to pursue them into the water. And their arrogance, their pride, got them wiped out.
And that's what our enemies think too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We're going to treat you any way we want to, and there's not much you can do, but then we prevail.
Yeah. We're going to stop there at 8:17, verse 17, chapter 18, because we're like really pushing up the end of the hour before we look at the precise.
Well, I have in reference for her was the man of Judah of Caleb's house, and the grandfather of Bezalel.
So is he Caleb's like grandfather maybe?
Grandfather of Bezalel. He's from the house. He's the man of Judah of Caleb's house. Whoever Bezalel is.
Okay. So we'll pick up here and look at what this, sometimes the most obvious thing is something we can't see. And that's the way I kind of described the advice that Jethro is going to give to Moses. You need to lighten up. You're killing yourself. You need to lighten up.
Well, he didn't see it. It took somebody else to go tell him.
Yep, absolutely. All right. Well, we hope that you have got something out of the class tonight. We will be back Sunday morning with Bible class at 9:45, and then 10:45 for worship, and then afternoons on Sundays at 4, and then we'll be back here at 6 next Wednesday. Until then, may God bless.